Petri Redelinghuys of Herenya capital advisors says South Africa's greylisting is a warning for the country to pull up its socks. On Friday, the Financial Action Task Force greylisted South Africa after it was established that it doesn't have sufficient mechanisms to monitor and deal with money laundering and terrorist financing activities. Now, in his weekly letter, President Cyril Ramaphosa said this move to add the country on the list is an opportunity to strengthen the fight against financial crimes. Ramaphosa added that the situation is concerning but less dire than some people suggest. The global anti-money laundering watchdog now wants the country to remove 8 strategic deficiencies by no later than January 2025. All right, let's get more on this now, and we're joined by Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix, Dr Azar Jammine. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time tonight. Does South Africa, in your view, and in the 20 years that the President says we have been a part of FATF, really have comprehensive laws in place to deal with complex financial crimes?
It appears as if some of those laws have actually been put into practice in the last couple of months in an effort to try and satisfy the FATF and try and preempt grey listing. But it appears as if we woke up a little bit too late in the exercise. It was only during the second half of last year that it became apparent that we may indeed be grey-listed, that the National Treasury pulled out all stops to try and develop legislation that might act against money laundering. Yeah. Having said that, the real problem appears to be not so much the legislation as the enforcement of the legislation and basically the prosecution of people and the bringing them to book and sending them to jail. That seems to be where we are lacking.
Very interesting that you raised that, because the President says, well, we did enter into this mutual evaluation process in 2019, which in and of itself says we took ourselves to this process following the state capture years. He says where we know that our institutions somewhat were undermined. But he says we then took a decision to put in the fundamentals in place. Why put in the fundamentals in place when we knew what we needed to do to avoid grey listing, and not actually opt to do the whole thing and not just the fundamentals?
Well, therein lies the problem. And of course, the suspicion is that some of the people within government who ought to have been involved in enforcing a lot of these new laws may have been reticent to do so because of their possible involvement. That is the conclusion one would draw from this. But I am glad to hear President Ramaphosa saying that this does give us an opportunity now to focus a little more carefully on the legislation and hopefully even more so the enforcement of the legislation between now and January 2025.
Is the President merely playing this down, or is it far more severe than he makes it out to be? I mean, he says the deficiencies picked up by FATF do not link directly with the country's financial sector. What does that mean in terms of financial stability and the cost of doing business? Because I've heard some businesses saying, well, the bureaucracy is going to be more stringent, and it might prove to be more costly now to do business with South Africa.
Well, therein lies the negative effects. The bureaucracy is going to increase a lot. There'll probably be a lot more forms that have to be filled, a lot more evidence to be given to try and prove that deals are not illicit. It's going to make it that much more difficult to transact financially and through trade internationally. And therein lies the potential negative effect in the longer term. But I agree with the President. In the very short term, I think you're hardly going to see much of an effect. I think the main effect that you're going to see and have seen to some extent already is a depreciation in the value of the rand, which will have some short-term inflationary effects and probably cause the Reserve Bank to have to raise interest rates a little further than it might otherwise have done. But the real damage is from a longer-term point of view. This acts as a significant deterrent to foreign trade and more particularly investment to come into the country.
Yeah. So not so much an impact on the financial institutions in terms of the state of our financial institutions, but you're saying...
Our financial institutions are very well run and have been taking a lot of their own measures to clamp down on, I better not say money laundering, but on cyber fraud. And I've had personal experience of it and I've been very impressed. But that it doesn't end there. The problem is that with the increase in corruption and state capture and criminal activity more generally that we have seen in the country, the financial sector is just one of, a lot of these things are beyond their control to clamp down on illicit trade.
So, judging from what the President is our focused action plan in place, firstly, is anybody else aware of this focused action plan that is in place within the financial sector, or is it just government that's aware of it?
Well, I haven't seen any details yet of this financial plan. Clearly, I think government must be talking to the financial sector in terms of the measures that they are taking. But yes, we still don't have very much detail on what actions are going to be taken. Even the issue of the legislation that has been passed in the last couple of months, I'm not clear in my own mind what that legislation actually entails.
Yeah. I mean, we are reading exactly from what the President is saying because we do not know and we have not seen this focused action plan that is in place that is going to be undertaken at least up until 2025 to get us off that list. But one of the areas highlighted by President is it seems we are failing to prove to FATF that we are cooperating with other countries that request mutual assistance from South Africa when it comes to these issues of money laundering. Would you say that is correct? We have not been as, I suppose, cooperative with other countries who are asking for mutual assistance?
I think that's possible. I think one complication that we may be encountering is that our relationships with some countries that are at the moment not very popular with some of the members of the FATF, most importantly Russia, which was actually kicked out of the FATF over the weekend as well. So to the extent that we would like to see ourselves cooperating with Russians, this is not probably going down very well with the FATF.
Yeah, and do you think things like that would prolong this process? We're sitting here and saying by 2025 we'll be off that list, but actually we won't. Because, I mean, the other area that the President is highlighting is the implementation of targeted financial sanctions.
Yes, I think there is a chance that if we are continue, playing around with our international relations the way we've been doing, we may well not return to normal listing and remove ourselves from greylisting. It's only in the realm of speculation at the moment, but we've got to be very careful because there will be a tendency to see the FATF as another one of these Western institutions that is there to try and enhance the interests of capitalism against countries that pursue socialism, and that may not be go down very, that perception may not be very popular within the government itself, and therefore there may not be the political will to cooperate to get out of the greylisting, as much as President Ramaphosa says has welcomed this and says that this move may precipitate self-examination and the introduction of better controls.
Yeah. One of the areas one would say that we have been able to do well within the country is to do work with the FICA and follow the trail of money within the country. But what has emerged with the state capture transactions that were offshore is that I suppose, I don't know whether we lack in terms of the intelligence, financial intelligence that's required in our law enforcement agencies to be able to wrap up those kinds of cases. Is that a weakness that we're working on?
I think you've identified a big problem, and part of the problem is not that we may not have the financial intelligence, but that we may not want to have the financial intelligence because some of the people who might be involved are in influential positions in the country and therefore don't want to see such action being taken. This is again in the realm of speculation, but that's the impression that one gets.
Yeah. How do we solve these things? I mean, I think the suggestion here is that we need to get world-class expertise. I think that's what, I mean, just reading from the president's letter, what FATF has said they need to do. 2 legislative reforms, which they tried in the last two years to put in place. But 3 is stronger institutions, which the president says, well, we've done a lot as far as that is concerned, as far as strengthening SARS, the MPA, the Hawks, and the SIU, and we've got something called a multidisciplinary fusion center. So what does really seem to lack here is those world-class expertise in terms of being able to detect and investigate these issues, and then what you also said, the prosecution of these cases.
Well, that's precisely in the area of Hawks and the SIU that people have expressed reservations as to whether they do indeed have the appropriate capacity to do their work, and whether they have not been emaciated so badly during the era of state capture that they are unable to recover. SARS is one institution, NPA possibly another, that have recovered, but the SIU and the Hawks are still lacking in investigative ability. That is what I gather. And then there's the whole question to come back to the issue of enforcement as well, that is leaving many people frustrated. And, you know, it's no coincidence that this has happened at a time when crime has escalated. You saw the crime figures last week, double-digit growth in things like murder and rape and robberies. I mean, it's no coincidence that that has happened at the same time as us being grey-listed. There has been a secular deterioration in the implementation of law and order, and one picks the first real manifestation of this was in the unrest in July 2021. But since then, people have expressed alarm that we are losing the battle against crime more generally, and that requires far more stringent enforcement of people who are found to have crossed the line.
Assuming that, as you put it, it doesn't become an ideological debate of whether or not FATF is one of those Western forces that are interfering in the sovereignty of South Africa and therefore will want to pull out of it, do you think it is I suppose, a blessing in disguise that we have been enlisted as a jurisdiction that requires constant monitoring? Because in a sense, it would mean they have to literally be holding our hand and watching that we are implementing these things that we need to be putting in place.
Well, I almost read into the president's statement precisely that interpretation, really. Yes, so, you know, let's try and look at the positive side of this.
I appreciate your time, Dr. Azar Jammine. Thank you very much for coming on tonight. That is Dr. Azar Jammine, the chief economist at Econometrix. They're looking at that listing of South Africa as a jurisdiction that will now be under constant monitoring when it comes to issues of money laundering, terrorism, funding, and of course such complicated criminal financial crimes that have been